This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Welcome to this evening's show. Chantell Ilbury and Clem Sunter have for more than a decade been painting scenarios. Clem Sunter will still tell you, if you ask him, try it one day when you bump into him, that he forecast the 9/11 attacks, and he did with unerring accuracy. Ever since then, the business of Mind of a Fox has grown, and most conferences that you go to of any substance will either feature Clem or Chantell Ilbury. Chantell Ilbury joins me this evening to talk about scenarios. The world is an ever more exciting and challenging place, Chantell Ilbury, and ever more uncertain. Let's go Northern Hemisphere first, if you don't mind.
Ever more uncertain, which brings challenges, but again, uncertainty also brings opportunity. So although we're looking at a world and saying it's really a sad and sorry place, there's a lot of strategy, I think, that is actually taking place and positioning for when we go back into a growth scenario.
Now, the Americans are looking at growth and they're looking in a solid position. The Chinese are slowing down. Some economists suggest that the Chinese numbers of 7% are substantially overinflated, that we've got, as South Africa, got a problem with the Chinese scenario in particular. What's your view?
No, absolutely, and I do think it's hard to believe 7%. It's a very managed slowdown, so there will be a slowdown. They are trying to manage it, but it could actually be less than 7%, which for a global environment, especially commodities, and South Africa being a resource-based economy, commodities in Africa and in South Africa, a slowdown in China is a problem for South Africa.
It's very significant. Do you look at BRICS scenarios particularly? We know Brazil's got its challenges. We know Russia under huge sanctions. It's a political pariah at the moment. India has got some interesting potential, new government in place there. China with the slowdown, and then little baby letter S of South Africa. What are your BRICS scenarios?
You know, we haven't taken BRICS as a grouping to do scenarios potentially around it. But if you have a look at the growth going forward, and when I looked at what are the things that are going to drive growth, and it is around resources, the water, the energy, the food, BRICS are well placed. All of the Brazil, Russia in terms of its resources at this point in time, India definitely from a different perspective, and South Africa, I think, not to the same extent, as you say, the small partner, but from a BRICS perspective, I think it's got huge potential as a bloc going forward in terms of changing the global landscape.
Then the importance of South Africa within that BRICS context on the African continent, which is, let's face it, the only reason we've been included in this exclusive club. You are not that optimistic from my presentation I saw earlier about South Africa's permanent status as gateway economy into this continent.
Look, I think we're one of the biggest economies on the African continent. So potentially we are gateway space, and we have the infrastructure, we have the resources and the capacity to be that gateway space. I'm a little hesitant to say we've actually taken that gateway space yet. I think we're part of BRICS, but without having utilized our potential in that space. And again, I think strategically we can't be complacent that we are automatically the gateway space in Africa, because there is a lot of movement in Africa. And you could have, in fact, even Nigeria, market-wise, could certainly be a gateway space. You could look at East Africa into the future as gateway space. So I think we're a little complacent with that positioning.
When people look at your scenarios, they want you to be a fortune teller. They want you to say, this will happen. It's impossible. The closest thing you've come to a spot-on prediction, and was one of the scenarios, as I mentioned earlier, was Clem talking about 9/11 as being a non-specific terror attack on a significant American city at some point. And within months it happened.
I know.
That was freaky. But scenario planning isn't always that clear, is it?
No, it's not. And it doesn't actually have to have an exact outcome, and that's the beauty around scenario planning. You are just looking at that future, you're being robust in your thinking about what some of those uncertainties are, and you're playing those scenarios predominantly so that you can be aware of your environment. The scenario itself doesn't have to necessarily come true, but that awareness of your environment opens up your thinking. You start to see flags, and you can start to think, what is that future going to look like?
Recently, the biggest story that's been dominating our headlines has been Greece and the possibility of a Greek exit from the European Union. The Greeks got themselves a loan. They will use that loan in the next 3 months. We'll go back to the scenario where there's a great deal of uncertainty around Greece and its future in the European Union, and we will repeat that Until we get a final resolution.
Yes.
Does it matter, really, the Greek scenario?
I think the Greek scenario has been played into market. So does it matter? No, it's small. If you have a look in a bigger picture about Europe and some of the consequences of Greece being allowed to kick the can and to continue, I think it does matter in a bigger picture in terms of the future around Europe, European Union. And I actually laugh because they used to talk about Brexit as being a worst case scenario. Yeah. Now they're saying it would be the best case scenario, a Brexit. So it's sort of an overnight shift from worst case scenario to best case scenario. So again, what is in terms of scenarios as you see the context changing going to...
If there is a Northern Hemisphere threat, it's the potential perhaps of a new Cold War scenario. Already the Russians and the Americans are getting a little bit hostile towards one another. The Chinese and the Americans are a little less friendly than perhaps they were some time ago. America's growing, Russia and China are slowing down. Are we headed that way, really?
I think there are some flags that indicate a far more unstable environment. Whether we would head to a potential Cold War scenario, I don't think that it would go that far, because I think there's far more balance in the power than there was in the past. So, from a unipolar world, we're far more into this multipolar world with more players in terms of the power. But I certainly think that the tensions and where those relationships are going to be into the future are going to shift from where they've been in the past. So I would, almost even put Russia, China more into the same, and that's one of the things that Putin is trying to do, is to look at that region and to build something there. He hasn't been successful, but I certainly think...
We as South Africa are nailing our colours, particularly to those red masts. If Russia has a red mast, and China most certainly still does, are we friends with the right people in the scenarios that you're looking at the moment?
I tend to think yes. I tend to think we are playing on the right side, because I think that's where the growth is going to be. As I say, they're managing their growth. They're looking far more internal to go consumer-driven economy versus their investment-driven economy, which will slow South Africa, but I do think ultimately those relationships are going to play into Africa and South Africa. So yes, I think being part of BRICS and being part of that bloc is potentially where we should be playing. But then again, I would look at our trade agreements, because there are trade issues happening within that bloc and we're losing out within the bloc.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking to play, we want to be one of the big wigs in the BRICS Bank. Do we have $10 billion to put up as security for our right to play? And that's one of the problems we have.
That's exactly. So, we want to be there. Politically, we want to be there, but practically and from an economic perspective, we're not the big player.
In your scenario planning, you talk about flags. You talk about these are the warning flags, these are the opportunity flags. You've got a range of flags. What flags are you seeing for South Africa right now?
I think one of the key flags is infrastructure, and that comes from a competitiveness point of view in terms of positioning South Africa. So we're talking things around beneficiation and some of the areas of growth that we're looking at. But then if we haven't got the infrastructure to meet those needs, we're not going to get that. I think there's another flag in the South African context too, and that is around technology and digitalization, and businesses, even into the mining sector, mechanizing more, job losses, further job losses, and that's something that South Africa, we've got to disconnect with our skills. So I would look to education as another key. But
you've been waving that education flag surely for the last 15 years.
And nothing's happened.
And you can wave it until, and your face is going red, it's going blue, you're going puce with desperation. But we're not, do we as a country take the flag seriously enough?
No, I don't think. Look, we put money to it, so there's a huge...
buckets of money.
Yes,
I mean,
so, but therein lies where's that money going and what's it doing? And in a way, we're putting it into infrastructure, so we're trying to get classrooms, but we're not looking at the real issue. And I think that is really the leverage point in education is around teachers. Passionate, being qualified, being able to teach and being able to pull through the pipeline, and I don't think we're looking at it from that perspective.
A while back, probably 2 years ago, hearing Clem speak, he was talking about the frog in the pot. The frog gets into a pot of cold water, the heat is turned up, and the frog, by the time it realizes it's in trouble, it's too late, it's being boiled to death. He had the sense 2 years ago we were in that sort of scenario. How's the temperature on the pot?
I think the temperature's turning up. And I actually do think we're starting to feel the heat.
But that's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, I think it is a good thing if we actually now react to the heat. But if we actually just feel the heat and we continue...
Swimming around like a frog, yes.
Exactly. So I think we are feeling the heat. I think that's why there seems to be, people feel that there's a negativeness in the South African context. And I'm not too sure that necessarily has to be, but we are feeling the heat. There are a number of challenges that are all now coming together, and we're not being able to cope. We're not coping with them.
I had this conversation with the head of a business school once about 3 or 4 years ago, and I said to him, things have actually got to break before they get fixed. We have a legacy of stopping just before things break down completely, but it feels like we're headed that way. Do your scenarios suggest it?
I think so. I kind of think we're on that meandering path, but that path is a declining path. So I think unless we arrest that and actually decide on where we're going to go, I do think we are in a slow decline.
It feels like we're waving a white flag. Have you got a blue flag of optimism?
Oh, I think there is a blue flag of optimism if we started. I think one of the key areas is the relationship between business and government. If one can build some trust and say we need to work in this together and take it to where South Africa needs to be, but there's absolutely no relationship, I would say, in any sector between business and government. So yes, I do think there's a blue flag that could change things.
There we go. Chantell Ilbury, thank you very much for joining us this evening. This has been the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Chantell Ilbury is one of the country's leading scenario planners. Those are some of the global scenarios, how they impact on South Africa, a deeply concerning position, according to the strategists, for the future of this country. There's lots of work to do. Thanks for watching. Till next time, good night.